I just got done announcing the free aquarium giveaway in Beta Fish Keepers. Congratulations, Christopher. I had to do a live stream on the spot to announce the winner. My heart is just throbbing. I still get nervous as how many I've done. But anyways, guys, congratulations, Christopher. Yesterday, as you remember, I revamped the flower horn tank, and he absolutely loves it. It looks amazing. I love it. I couldn't be happier. But today I was working on this tank down here, and I noticed one of the sponge filters wasn't working very well. So I figured, why not do a video on modifying sponge filters Chris's way? This is how I modify them. This is years and years of me screwing with sponge filters, dabbling, drilling, melting, starting them on fire, everything I can do to make them work better. Let's just jump right into this. Hopefully it helps you guys, and maybe you want to use my methodology in building or modifying your sponge filters. So I decided to completely revamp the 75-gallon tank below the flower horn tank. And if you guys remember, I had goldfish in this tank, but to be honest with you, I just really wasn't feeling them. So I don't know what completely I'm going to do with this tank yet. I'm desiring a darker colored substrate. I may do a planted tank in here, not sure yet. I'm going to add some black gravel here. As you see, I have the Midas in here temporarily in here just because he needs a home. Still looking for a home for him locally. If anybody wants him, please reach out to me. But let's get back to sponge filters. While I was working on this tank, I noticed one of the sponge filters had completely stopped working. So this was a perfect reason for us to dive right into how I rebuild the sponge filters. And what I do when I come into my tanks every single day is I make sure that all the sponge filters are working and air is coming out of them adequately. Alright guys, let's just dive right into taking this thing apart. And bear with me because this thing is really dirty. It's been in a tank for a long time. So here is the body, or also known as the housing to the sponge filter. This is what it looks like if you were to put it together without the sponge itself. So this sponge filter had no air coming out of it whatsoever. So I'm leading to believe that it has something to do with the air stone. Maybe something could be up with the sponge that's completely clogged and not letting flow through, but that's pretty uncommon. You'll still get some bubbles coming out of it. So I'm going to take the unit apart, and you have to know that depending on the sponge filter, the units are a little bit different, each of them. And as you can see, this does have an air stone in it, and that's what we're going to be changing today. My main modification on sponge filters is that I stopped using air stones completely. I know that's going to sound crazy to you guys, but I actually use these airline tees. These are fittings. These are airline fittings, guys, what you would use to kind of split your airlines. And the reason I use it is because I initially wanted to just stuff the airline inside the sponge filter and have no air stone whatsoever. But when I went to pull on the airline itself, it would just come right out of the sponge filter, and then it would be laying on the bottom of your tank, and you have to go in there and grab it. So as you can see, these little airline tees fit in there perfect. And the reason is because I also give it a little bit of a cut. I cut the edge of it off. You probably don't have to, but it just kind of helps it fit in there. So essentially, this little airline fitting, when you stuff it into the sponge filter, it just holds the airline inside the housing unit itself. So when you go to pull it out, you're actually grabbing onto something. Here, I'll show you. So I give it a little bit of a cut. I cut the side of the fitting just so it has more room to kind of blow out air bubbles inside of the sponge filter housing. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking out air stones out of the picture because they always fail. And you could argue, well, just get clogless air stones. Well, those things are like $6 to $10 a piece, and this is completely free. And you may argue that smaller bubbles might be better in sponge filters, but I'm entirely over that because I could argue that, you know, the larger air bubbles give you more surface agitation, and that might be more important than the smaller bubbles coming out of the sponge filter. Hopefully that makes sense. I've spent countless hours trialing and testing different methods for the sponge filtration because that's all I use, and I am convinced this is my favorite method now with sponge filters. this fitting on the inside of them gives it a lot more airflow. There's no back pressure on the air pump whatsoever, and you don't have to deal with air stones. I would say the number one disadvantage to this is that you have larger size bubbles coming out of the sponge filter, but I'm completely over that because I'm gaining so much more surface agitation because there's so much more air pressure coming out of the sponge filter. So I'm completely sold on this, guys, and hopefully it can help some of you guys if you want to modify your sponge filters. And I know this isn't super technical stuff. Some of you guys are probably thinking like, oh wow, Chris, you reinvented the wheel here. No, what happened was I just had an obstacle of overcoming air stones because they just were getting super annoying and clogging on me, and now I don't use them at all. So maybe you guys can use this method, or maybe you don't like it, but I've been having great luck with it in my tanks. And argue me in the comments because I love a good argument on this stuff. And I don't know, I kind of geek out with sponge filters. I have like 100 videos on them. So also, if anybody is local, this Midas is still available, and let me know in the comment section if you have done any modifications to your sponge filters and if you use air stones or not.